In 1911, the Zeneti Express left Rome with just over 100 wealthy travellers, expecting a pleasant ride through the countryside. Everything was normal until the locomotive approached a routine 500-metre tunnel in Lombardy and never came out the other side, vanishing in a way that should be impossible. This wasn't another rail disaster. The train entered the tunnel but never emerged from the other side. Not the engine, not the passenger cars, not a single person on board. Search teams scoured every inch of the tunnel within hours, finding no debris, no signs of collision, no evidence of any accident whatsoever. The tracks were completely intact, showing no damage or disturbance. Only one person survived to tell what happened inside that tunnel, and his account is more disturbing than any crash could have been. A passenger had jumped from the train in panic just before it entered the tunnel, claiming that the entire interior had filled with an impenetrable white mist. He described feeling disoriented and terrified as this fog engulfed everything around him. When he regained consciousness after his fall, the train had completely vanished. But here's where this story transforms from mysterious disappearance to evidence of parallel world displacement. Decades later, researchers discovered records in Mexican archives from 1845 describing the sudden appearance of approximately 100 confused Italian travelers in Mexico City. These individuals claimed they had departed Rome by train on July 14, 1911, and insisted they were from that year, despite appearing 66 years in the past. The authorities in 1845 considered these people delusional and placed many in psychiatric facilities. However, the records contain detailed accounts of their consistent insistence that they belonged to the 20th century. Most compelling of all, one of these individuals carried a snuff box clearly engraved with the manufacturing date of 1907, decades after their appearance in 19th century Mexico. The mathematical impossibility of this coincidence suggests something far more extraordinary than a simple train accident. If these records are authentic, the Zeneti Express didn't crash. It slipped through a crack in reality, carrying its passengers not just to a different location, but to a completely different timeline where the year 1911 existed in 1845. Our second case involves a Swiss teacher whose consciousness apparently travelled to the year 3906, while his body lay in a medical coma. Paul Amadeus Dienach fell ill with encephalitis lethargica in 1921 and remained unconscious for nearly a year. But according to his detailed writings after awakening, his mind had been transported far into the future, experiencing life in an advanced civilization thousands of years ahead of our time. What makes Dienach's account remarkable isn't just the claim of temporal displacement, but the sophisticated detail of his descriptions. He wrote extensively about the social structures, technology, and philosophy of this future world, describing a society that had eliminated war, poverty, and disease through both technological advancement and spiritual evolution. The people of 3906, according to Dienach, possessed lifespans extending beyond 200 years and had developed medical techniques that could heal conditions considered incurable in our era. Their cities existed in perfect harmony with nature, and their entire civilization operated on principles of collective well-being rather than individual competition. But perhaps most intriguing was Dienach's description of how consciousness itself had evolved in this distant future. He claimed that humans of that era understood the fundamental connection between mind and reality in ways that allowed them to manipulate physical matter through focused intention. This wasn't mysticism to them, but advanced science based on discoveries about the quantum nature of consciousness. When Dienach finally returned to his own time and body in 1922, he spent years documenting his experiences in what became known as the Chronicles from the Future. His writings demonstrate knowledge of scientific concepts that wouldn't be developed until decades after his death, including principles that align remarkably with modern quantum physics and consciousness research. The detail and consistency of his account, combined with his apparent knowledge of future scientific developments, suggests that Dionac's experience might have been more than an elaborate dream or hallucination. Could his consciousness have actually displaced to a parallel version of Earth where human civilization had evolved along dramatically different lines? Our third case brings us to rural Tennessee in 1880, where a farmer named David Lang vanished in full view of his family and neighbors, in a way that challenges our understanding of physical reality itself. On September 23rd, Lang was walking across his own field when he simply disappeared mid-stride. No flash of light, no sound, no indication of what had occurred. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The witnesses included his wife, children, and 2 visiting neighbors who immediately rushed to the exact spot where Lang had been walking. They found something that made the incident even more mysterious. The ground where he had vanished formed a perfect circle where no grass would grow, despite repeated attempts to replant the area. This barren patch remained visible for years, as if the very earth had been fundamentally altered by whatever had taken him. But the story becomes even more unsettling. For months after his disappearance, Lang's family reported hearing his voice emanating from that same spot. The voice sounded distant and desperate, calling for help and claiming he didn't know where he was. These auditory phenomena were witnessed by multiple people over an extended period, suggesting they weren't hallucinations or wishful thinking. The circular dead zone in the grass has been interpreted by some researchers as evidence of a temporary portal or dimensional rift. Reports of similar phenomena often describe boundary areas where the normal laws of physics become unstable, creating zones where matter can be displaced to other locations or dimensions. If Lang's disappearance was caused by such a rift, his continuing voice might indicate that he became trapped in a parallel space adjacent to our reality. Perhaps he could see and call out to our world, but couldn't return from whatever dimension had claimed him. The possibility that he spent months or years calling for help from a place his family could hear but never reach adds a tragic dimension to this already disturbing case. The scientific implications of Lang's disappearance extend beyond simple mystery. If portals between parallel realities can open spontaneously in ordinary locations, it suggests that the barriers between different versions of our world are far more fragile than we assume. What appears to be solid reality might be riddled with invisible weak points where the wrong step at the wrong moment could displace someone to an entirely different version of existence. Our investigation into these temporal anomalies reveals a disturbing pattern. Each case involves ordinary people in mundane situations suddenly finding themselves displaced from their normal reality. Whether transported through time, shifted to parallel dimensions, or caught between worlds. These individuals experience something that shouldn't be possible, according to our current understanding of physics. But what if our understanding is incomplete? What if the universe operates according to rules we haven't discovered yet? The consistency of these accounts across different time periods, locations, and cultures suggests we might be dealing with a genuine phenomenon rather than isolated delusions or fabrications. The evidence points toward a reality far stranger than the stable, predictable world we assume we inhabit. Perhaps we're living in just one layer of an infinite series of parallel realities, occasionally glimpsing or slipping into adjacent versions where history unfolded differently, where the laws of physics operate under different parameters, or where time itself flows according to different rules. These 10 cases represent just the documented incidents we know about. How many other people have experienced similar displacements without anyone believing their accounts? How many apparent disappearances, unexplained appearances, or impossible coincidences might actually be evidence of people slipping between the cracks of reality? The implications are staggering. If parallel worlds exist and the boundaries between them are permeable, everything we think we know about the nature of existence needs to be reconsidered. The person sitting next to you might be from a slightly different version of this world, where history played out differently. The memories you have that don't match anyone else's recollection might be accurate memories from a parallel timeline you originated in. As we continue examining these reality-breaking cases, one question becomes increasingly urgent. If these incidents prove that parallel worlds exist and people can slip between them, what does that mean for the stability of our own reality? Are we living in the same world we were born in, or have we been unknowingly shifting between versions of existence our entire lives? The next case takes us deep into the heart of Brazil, where an entire village of 600 people vanished without leaving behind so much as a footprint. In 1923, the small community of Hoya Verde existed as it had for generations, nestled in the remote wilderness, where families lived simple lives connected to the land and each other. Then one morning, everything changed. A travelling merchant arrived to find empty streets, abandoned homes, and meals still sitting on tables, as if the entire population had simply evaporated mid-bite. Doors stood open, revealing interiors frozen in time. Coffee cups remained half full and still warm. Children's toys lay scattered where they had been dropped moments before. The merchant's initial confusion turned to horror as he explored further. Not only had every human disappeared, but so had all the animals. Dogs, chickens, livestock, even the insects seemed to have vanished from the area. The silence was absolute and unnatural, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps echoing through the deserted settlement. In the village centre, investigators later discovered a wooden sign bearing a chilling message written in large letters. "There is no salvation." These 4 words provided the only clue to what might have motivated such a complete abandonment, though they raised more questions than they answered. Brazilian authorities launched extensive searches of the surrounding jungle, interviewing neighbouring communities and examining every possible explanation. They found no evidence of violence, no signs of struggle, no indication that the villagers had packed belongings or prepared for departure. The people of Hoya Verde had simply ceased to exist in this reality. What made this case even more mysterious were the unusual objects discovered in several homes after the disappearance. Investigators found books written in unknown languages, strange geometric symbols carved into wooden surfaces, and what appeared to be ritual implements arranged in specific patterns. These artifacts suggested the villagers might have been involved in practices designed to manipulate the fundamental structure of reality itself. Some researchers theorized that the residents of Hoya Verde had discovered ancient knowledge about the nature of dimensional boundaries. Perhaps they had learned to create portals between parallel worlds, spending years preparing for a coordinated exodus to an alternative version of Earth, where their community could continue existing under different circumstances. The ominous message about salvation might indicate they understood their departure would be permanent. Maybe they weren't fleeing from something in this world, but consciously choosing to relocate their entire civilization to a parallel reality where different possibilities awaited them. The synchronized nature of their disappearance suggests careful planning rather than panic or accident. Our 5th case involves a discovery that challenges everything we assume about the relationship between different versions of reality. In 1950, New York police found a man lying unconscious in the middle of Times Square after being struck by a taxi. What should have been a routine traffic accident investigation became one of the most puzzling cases in police records when they examined his personal effects. The victim carried identification showing his name as Rudolph Fentz, but everything about his appearance and possessions suggested he belonged to a completely different era. His clothing looked like authentic 19th century fashion, yet showed no signs of age or wear. The money in his wallet consisted of currency that had been out of circulation for decades, still crisp and new as if freshly minted. More disturbing was the man's apparent age. According to his identification, Fentz had been born in 1846. Which would have made him over 100 years old in 1950. However, the body appeared to be that of a healthy man in his 30s, showing no signs of advanced aging or the physical deterioration expected from someone who had lived for more than a century. Police investigators decided to dig deeper into this impossible case. In missing persons files from 1876, they discovered a report for one Rudolf Fentz, aged 29, who had disappeared without trace during an evening walk. The description matched the accident victim perfectly down to the smallest physical details. Further investigation revealed that a man named Rudolf Fentz Jr. was listed in the 1939 New York telephone directory. When contacted, this individual confirmed that his father had mysteriously vanished in 1876 and had never been found. He provided a photograph of his missing father that was identical to the man killed in Times Square, as if no time had passed between the two images. The implications of this case are staggering. If the evidence is authentic, Rudolf Fentz had somehow travelled 74 years into the future, arriving in 1950, looking exactly as he had when he disappeared in 1876. But what mechanism could have transported him across nearly 3/4 of a century while preserving his youth and keeping his possessions in perfect condition? One possibility is that Fentz had become trapped in a temporal anomaly that moved him forward through time while keeping him suspended outside the normal aging process. Perhaps he had unknowingly stepped through an invisible portal that connected his era with the mid-20th century, experiencing the transition as a momentary disorientation before finding himself in an unfamiliar world. The tragic irony is that his journey through time ended moments after his arrival when he stepped directly into traffic, overwhelmed by the shocking transformation of the world around him. Times Square in 1950 would have been utterly alien to someone from 1876, filled with electric lights, automobiles, and crowds moving at a pace incomprehensible to someone from the horse and buggy era. Our sixth case takes us to a small English cottage where the impossible became routine through electronic messages that shouldn't have been possible. In 1984, teacher Ken Webster was using his BBC microcomputer in a rented cottage in Dodleston when strange text files began appearing on his system. The computer wasn't connected to any network, making the appearance of external messages technically impossible. The texts claimed to come from someone named Lucas, who insisted he was living in the exact same house, but in the year 1546. Lucas wrote in archaic English that Webster could barely understand at first, describing his life in 16th century England with remarkable detail and consistency. He spoke of local markets, farming practices, and village politics with the intimate knowledge of someone who actually lived in that era. What transformed this from curious anomaly to genuine mystery was the interactive nature of the communication. Lucas claimed that everything Webster typed on his computer appeared as magical writing on a slateboard in his time. In response, Lucas would write messages that somehow materialized as text files on Webster's 20th century computer. Over months of correspondence, a fascinating picture emerged. Lucas described his world with the authentic voice of someone struggling to understand why magical symbols kept appearing in his home. He wrote about the suspicions of his neighbors, who feared he was involved in witchcraft because of the mysterious writing that appeared and disappeared on his slate. Webster and his companions tried to explain their modern world to Lucas, describing electricity, automobiles, and airplanes. But much of what they shared sounded like fantasy to someone living in an era where the most advanced technology was watermills and sailing ships. Lucas, in turn, painted a vivid picture of daily life in Tudor England, complete with details that matched historical records Webster couldn't have accessed. The correspondence became even stranger when Lucas reported receiving messages from a third party, someone who belonged neither to his time nor to Webster's. This unknown communicator described places and events that existed in neither the 16th century nor the 1980s, suggesting a connection that spanned multiple parallel timelines simultaneously. Researchers who later examined the case found no technical explanation for how a computer without network access could receive external text files, especially ones that demonstrated knowledge of historical details not widely known in 1984. The consistency and authenticity of Lucas's writing style, combined with his accurate descriptions of 16th century life, suggested something far more extraordinary than an elaborate hoax. Some theorists propose that the Dodleston cottage existed at a weak point in the dimensional fabric, allowing communication to flow between different versions of the same location across centuries. Perhaps certain places are naturally prone to temporal anomalies, creating windows where past, present, and future can intersect in ways that bypass normal physical laws. Our seventh case involves a man who appeared in Kiev in 2006, carrying documentation that proved he was either an elaborate fraud or evidence that time travel had actually occurred. Sergei Ponomarenko was discovered by police looking confused and disoriented on a busy street, dressed in clothing that appeared to belong to the 1950s and carrying a camera from that same era. When officers asked for identification, Ponomarenko produced a Soviet passport issued in 1956 under his name. According to the document, he had been born in 1932, which should have made him 74 years old in 2006. However, the man standing before them appeared to be in his late 20s, matching exactly the photograph in the decades-old passport. Ponomarenko claimed to be from 1958 and insisted he had been photographing locations around Kiev when he encountered a strange silver object in the sky. After taking a picture of this mysterious craft, he described being engulfed in blinding light and losing consciousness. The next thing he remembered was awakening in what appeared to be the same city, but everything had changed dramatically. Police developed the film from his camera, revealing photographs of Kiev exactly as it had appeared in the 1950s, showing buildings and locations that had been demolished or significantly altered decades earlier. One photograph clearly showed the unusual silver object he claimed to have encountered, displaying characteristics that didn't match any known aircraft from that era. Perhaps most compelling was the discovery in police archives of a missing person report from 1958. A young woman had reported her fiancé, Sergei Ponomarenko, missing after he failed to return from a photography expedition. The description, photograph, and personal details matched perfectly with the man found on the street in 2006. The physical evidence supporting Ponomarenko's account created serious challenges for skeptics. His clothing, camera, film stock, and even the passport paper all appeared to be authentic materials from the 1950s, showing appropriate signs of age and wear. The photographs demonstrated intimate knowledge of Kiev's historical appearance that would have been extremely difficult to fake. If Ponomarenko's story is genuine, it suggests that encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena might involve more than simple observation. Perhaps these objects represent technology capable of displacing people through time, either accidentally or intentionally, transporting individuals between different eras. The traumatic nature of his experience, suddenly finding himself decades in the future, in a world that had changed beyond recognition, illustrates the psychological impact such displacement would have on anyone. Imagine waking up to discover that everyone you knew was dead, that your entire way of life had vanished, and that you were stranded in what might as well be an alien civilization. Our eighth case takes us to Germany in 1851, where authorities encountered a man whose very existence challenged the fundamental structure of reality. The stranger appeared in Frankfurt an der Oder, claiming his name was Jofar Vorin, and he insisted he came from a country called Laxaria, on a continent named Sakria. The problem was that no such places existed on any map known to human civilization. Vorin spoke a mixture of broken German and a completely unknown language that no linguist could identify or trace to any existing linguistic family. His clothing appeared foreign in ways that went beyond simple cultural differences, featuring cuts and materials that didn't match any known fashion traditions. Everything about his appearance suggested he had travelled from somewhere that simply didn't exist in our version of Earth. During extensive questioning, Vorin provided detailed descriptions of his homeland that sounded absolutely convincing despite being impossible. He spoke of Laxaria as a prosperous kingdom with specific cities, trade routes, and political structures. He described the geography of continent Sacria with the intimate knowledge of someone who had actually lived there his entire life. When officials showed him maps of Europe, Vorin studied them with obvious confusion before pointing to the location where Frankfurt currently stood. According to him, this was exactly where Laxaria should be, but the map was completely wrong. In his reality, the German states didn't exist and had been replaced by his peaceful kingdom ruled by a benevolent monarch. The most unsettling aspect of Vorin's account was his explanation for how he had arrived in this strange land. He claimed that while walking through a forest in Laxaria, he had suddenly been surrounded by an inexplicable bright light. The next thing he knew, he was standing in what appeared to be a completely different world, where his homeland had been replaced by unfamiliar countries and cultures. What made Vorin's case particularly compelling was his apparent advanced knowledge of subjects that seemed beyond what would be expected from someone living in the 19th century. His understanding of certain scientific principles and geographical concepts suggested either extraordinary education or access to information from a more technologically developed civilization. Some researchers have theorized that Vorin was a visitor from a parallel version of Earth where history had unfolded along completely different lines. In his reality, the Germanic tribes might have developed into different political entities, creating the Kingdom of Laxaria instead of the confederation of German states that existed in our timeline. The case becomes even more mysterious considering Vorin's apparent age and physical condition. He claimed to have originally come from the year 2083, suggesting he was not only from a parallel world, but also a time traveler who had somehow become displaced across both dimensions and centuries. This double displacement could explain his advanced knowledge and his confusion about finding himself in 19th century Germany. After several days of interrogation and examination, Vorin vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. Guards reported that he simply disappeared from his secured room without any explanation for how he had escaped. Some believe he found a way to return to his own reality, while others theorize he was retrieved by whatever force had originally brought him to our world. Our ninth case involves one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century and a disappearance that has never been satisfactorily explained. Ettore Majorana was an Italian physicist whose groundbreaking work in quantum mechanics and nuclear physics had established him as one of the most promising scientists of his generation. His colleagues described him as a genius, capable of solving the most complex mathematical equations entirely in his head. On March 27, 1938, Majorana boarded a ship traveling from Palermo to Naples and simply vanished. Despite extensive search operations that covered both the coastline and the Mediterranean Sea, no trace of him was ever found. No body, no personal belongings, not even a single clue about what might have happened during the journey. The disappearance took on an entirely different dimension. 17 years later, when a photograph surfaced in Argentina showing a man who appeared to be Majorana, forensic analysis of the facial features revealed multiple points of similarity that strongly suggested the identity was genuine. But the most shocking aspect was that the man in the photograph had not aged at all since his disappearance in 1938. Former colleagues who examined the photograph were not entirely surprised by this development. They revealed that in the months before his disappearance, Majorana had been making cryptic comments about having developed something that would revolutionize the world. Some speculated that his breakthrough involved the practical application of time travel technology. If Majorana had indeed invented a functioning time machine, it would explain both his mysterious disappearance and his apparent appearance in Argentina nearly 2 decades later without having aged. Perhaps his initial experiment had transported him forward in time to 1955, accounting for why he looked exactly the same as he had when he vanished from the ship in 1938. The timing of his disappearance, just months before World War II began, raises additional questions about his motivations. Perhaps Majorana realized the dangerous implications of his discovery and chose to remove himself from a timeline where his technology might be used for destructive purposes. By travelling to a different era or even a parallel reality, he could have prevented his invention from falling into the wrong hands. Another possibility is that Majorana's experiments had attracted the attention of entities from other timelines who recognized the threat his technology posed to the stability of multiple realities. His disappearance might have been an intervention designed to prevent temporal paradoxes or dimensional catastrophes that could have resulted from uncontrolled time travel experimentation. Our 10th and final case brings us to modern times with photographic evidence that suggests someone has actually travelled to the distant future and returned with proof. In 2018, a man identifying himself only as Edward appeared in several online videos claiming to be a genuine time traveller from a secret government program. Edward's story involved working for a classified organisation that had developed functional time travel technology using advanced quantum computing principles. According to him, this machine could transport individuals into the future, but included safety mechanisms that prevented travel into the past beyond the machine's creation date, ensuring that operators couldn't become stranded in eras where return technology didn't exist. The evidence Edward provided consisted of a photograph he claimed to have taken during a mission to the year 5000. The image showed Los Angeles completely submerged beneath rising ocean waters, with strange architectural structures rising above the surface on massive support pillars. The cityscape looked both familiar and utterly alien, recognizable as Los Angeles but transformed by centuries of adaptation to a flooded world. Edward described this future civilization as technologically advanced but permanently shaped by environmental catastrophe. The residents had learned to build upward from underwater foundations, creating floating communities connected by boats and aerial vehicles. Their society had adapted to life on a planet where dry land had become an extremely precious resource. What made Edward's account particularly disturbing were his warnings about the limited number of time travel missions each person could undertake. He claimed that the process involved exposure to dangerous radiation that accumulated with each journey, eventually causing irreversible health damage. This limitation meant that time travelers could only make a few trips before the physical cost became too dangerous to continue. Edward also spoke about witnessing multiple potential futures during his various missions, suggesting that the timeline wasn't fixed, but consisted of numerous possible paths that humanity might follow. The flooded Los Angeles he photographed represented just one potential outcome among many possible scenarios for Earth's environmental future. The photograph itself defies easy explanation. While skeptics argue it could be digitally manipulated, supporters point out that the level of detail and internal consistency would require sophisticated knowledge of urban planning, architecture, and environmental science to create convincingly. The image shows not just flooding, but thoughtful adaptation that reflects genuine understanding of how civilization might evolve under such conditions. These 10 cases represent far more than isolated anomalies or curious coincidences. Together, they form a pattern suggesting that our reality might be far less stable than we assume. The boundaries between different versions of existence appear to be permeable, allowing occasional glimpses into parallel worlds where history unfolded differently or where the laws of physics operate according to alternative principles. Each incident challenges our fundamental assumptions about the nature of time, space, and consciousness itself. Whether involving entire communities vanishing into other dimensions, individuals displaced across centuries, or communication flowing between different eras, these cases suggest that reality operates according to rules we haven't yet discovered or understood. The implications extend beyond academic curiosity into practical questions about the stability of our own existence. If these accounts are genuine, they indicate that any of us could potentially slip between parallel realities without warning or control. The world we experience as solid and predictable might actually be just one layer in an infinite series of alternative possibilities. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that these documented cases represent only a small fraction of actual dimensional displacement incidents. How many people have experienced similar phenomena but remained silent due to fear of ridicule or disbelief? How many apparent disappearances, unexplained appearances, or impossible coincidences might actually be evidence of people moving between different versions of reality? The consistency of these reports across different time periods, cultures, and geographical locations suggests we might be dealing with a genuine aspect of physics rather than psychological delusion or elaborate deception. The universe might be far stranger and more interconnected than our current scientific models can accommodate. As we consider these reality-bending possibilities, one final question emerges that challenges everything we think we know about our own existence. If parallel worlds are real and the boundaries between them are occasionally permeable, how can we be certain that the reality we're experiencing right now is the same one we were born into? The evidence we've examined reveals something profound about the nature of existence itself. These aren't random events scattered across history. They're glimpses into a cosmic architecture far more complex than anything we've dared to imagine. Each case demonstrates that the solid, predictable reality we take for granted might actually be constructed from layers of possibility, stacked like pages in an infinite book where sometimes the boundaries blur and pages stick together. What connects all these incidents isn't just their impossibility, it's the precision with which they occur. The Zeneti train didn't just disappear randomly. It emerged exactly where and when it would create the most compelling evidence for dimensional displacement. Rudolf Fentz didn't arrive in any arbitrary year. He materialized at the precise moment that would allow investigators to trace his missing person report back to 1876. This precision suggests something far more structured than accidental slippage between worlds. It implies that these crossings might be governed by rules we haven't discovered yet. Rules that determine when, where, and how these dimensional boundaries become permeable. Rules that might explain why certain locations seem to attract multiple incidents, while others remain completely stable. Consider the mathematical impossibility of these coincidences occurring by pure chance. The odds of finding historical records that perfectly match displaced persons, or discovering artifacts that confirm impossible timelines, stretch beyond what probability theory can accommodate. We're not dealing with luck or coincidence. We're witnessing evidence of systematic interaction between parallel versions of reality. Perhaps most disturbing is what these cases suggest about our own stability in this reality. If dimensional displacement can happen to anyone, anywhere, without warning, how do we know we're still in the same world we started in? How do we verify that our memories of yesterday match the actual history of this timeline? The answer might be that we can't. And maybe that's exactly what these 10 cases are trying to tell us about the true nature of existence itself. So the next time you experience that strange feeling that something isn't quite right with reality, don't dismiss it so quickly. That moment when you walk into a familiar room and everything feels slightly off. That instance when you remember an event completely differently from everyone else who was there. That eerie sensation that the world has been rearranged while you weren't looking. These experiences might not be tricks of memory or imagination after all. They might be evidence that you've briefly slipped between the layers of parallel existence, catching a glimpse of adjacent realities bleeding through into our own. The 10 cases we've explored today prove that the boundaries between different versions of our world are far thinner and more permeable than we ever dared to believe. From entire trains vanishing into temporal mist, to brilliant scientists disappearing only to reappear decades later without aging, from villages evacuating to parallel dimensions, to consciousness traveling across millennia, these incidents reveal a universe operating according to rules we're only beginning to understand. Rules that suggest our solid, predictable reality might actually be just one frequency in an infinite spectrum of possible worlds. The evidence is undeniable, the patterns too consistent to ignore. the mathematical impossibilities too precise to be coincidental. We're not alone in this reality, and this reality isn't as stable as we assumed. Somewhere out there, other versions of ourselves are living different lives in worlds where history unfolded along alternative paths, which raises the ultimate question that should keep you awake tonight. How do you know that the reality you're experiencing right now is the same one you were born into? How can you be certain that while you were sleeping, you didn't slip through one of those invisible cracks and wake up in a parallel version of your own life? The answer might be more unsettling than you're prepared to accept. But now that you know these dimensional glitches are real, you'll never look at those strange moments of displaced reality the same way again. Because maybe, just maybe, they're not glitches at all. Maybe they're glimpses of the infinite possibilities that exist just beyond the edges of our perception, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves.